Hello everyone! So I just finished this massive project. It's the Daenerys dress from Season 5, Episode 2. And now I want to teach you guys how to make it as well. This dress takes about 2 weeks to create, that is if you're making all your own materials, which take about half of that time, and it's a bit of an undertaking. The dress will probably take around 10 to 14 yards of material to make, including lining. And that was for a size 0 dress that I created. So depending on what size you're making, it's going to take more. I wanted this video to be as user-friendly as possible, so I created a menu you can use off to the right that will take you around to the different sections of sewing. So that's about it. Go ahead and have fun. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and I will try my best to help you out with this project. So I just finished 6 days of smocking and fabric texturing, and it was grueling. So the first texture we did was arrow smocking. It looks really interesting, but it was extremely puffy. I'm only going to be using it for the upper parts of the sleeves, but I needed something a little bit thinner over the bust of the dress and the back. So the second smocking technique I did was shell smocking. That is what we're going to end up using for the bust of the dress. Now when I did that, I did whole inch, and the last texture I did for the dress was a grid patterned seam line. What that did is it kind of created a scaly texture, which we're going to use for the sleeves of the dress. Now, this is a lot of work. If you want an easier technique to get these textures, or if you don't even want to have to make these textures, there are businesses out there that do pre-made pleated textures. And I've actually linked to one of the businesses I contacted below. They told me that it would cost about 27 euros per textured piece of fabric. And now you might have to get several chunks of that material, but if you want to save yourself like a whole week of time, it might be worth it to you. Let's go ahead and get into the first of these textures, and that will be shell smocking. What you first need to do is take a ruler and a pencil, or a straight edge of any kind, and make a square grid across your fabric. I've already done this with my fabric, and I've done it at approximately 1-inch intervals. Now this may be a bit big, but it took me about 2 days to do 2 yards of shell smock at this interval. If you want, you can move down and do 1/2-inch grids, and that will make your shell smock about 1/4 the size of mine, but will also probably take about 4 to 8 days longer. I need to take my needle and thread and start at this bottom corner right here. So to start, I'm going to put my needle down here in this lowest section, put it through and grab just a little nip of the fabric, then go up to this interval right here, so the cross section of that square, and grab just a little nip of the fabric right there. Then I go back to that first nip and I make another little nip, and then I draw those points together. Then I'm going to just do 2 stitches through it, like so, to make sure that it doesn't come undone. Now, I'm going to go up 1 line to this next section, and when you're doing a smock, your lines kind of look like this little center X if you spread open that little nip you just created. So I'm going to make a nip through that center crosshair, and I'm going to leave that one loose. Now what I need to do is from that point right there, go up to this corner on the opposite side, and then back again to that center crosshair. And now I'm going to hold this down with my fingers, because remember, I don't want this line right here to get tightened. I'm just going to pull that tight, then grab it with my fingers, and put 2 stitches through that to make sure that it stays closed. So what you're going to do is you're going to continue to do this up the edge. So again, I turn to the other side now, and I find that center crosshair right there. Grab it, Make sure that that line doesn't get tightened. Then go up to the kitty corner, grab it. And when you're doing this, you're probably going to have to practice a few times. And you might have to pull your thread out a few times if you make mistakes. It happens. So I'm putting my 2 double stitches through that one now. If I can get my needle out. And again, I'm looking for that center crosshair on the opposite side. Sticking my needle through. Making sure that it does not get tightened. Going up to the kitty corner, grabbing it. And then back down here again, nipping the fabric at the crosshair again. And then pulling that tight and making sure that it pulls right to the corners. You're just going to do this all the way to the top and then tie it off. Now that I'm at the end, I'm just going to go ahead and tie that off with a couple of slip-through knots. And then I will cut the thread and start at the next line. So this is what one line of the shell smock looks like. Now if we turn it over, this is what we're starting to get on the other side. So it's not quite showing you what the shell smock is going to look like in the end, so we need to do at least a couple more lines. So we're back on this side again. And the thing about the shell smock is, there's a square panel in between each of these 2 line sections that is empty. And in that case, that's going to be this panel of squares right here. So I'm going to go ahead and ignore this panel right here. Move on over to this center point right here, and what I have to figure out is how to get the smock to line up so that it is symmetrical to this side. So the first one I'm going to end up doing, it looks like, is I'm going to go here, so at the very bottom of our new line section. And I noticed that this one is facing outwards this way. So I need this one over here to face outwards this way, which means that it has to be this panel because this is the central panel which is going to face inwards. So I'm going to go ahead and start at the bottom here and start a new line of smocking. And I'm going to go up to that square first because once those fall together, it will be facing outwards. So I've pulled those together as my starting stitch. And I'm going to go ahead and pull those tight. So now that I've done that stitch, I'm going to go ahead and go back this way and find that crosshair. Then I'm going to go up to here and then back to here and then pull those together. Then back to the other side, find the crosshair, make sure there's slack, then go up and so on. So once I'm done with this, I'll go ahead and show you the next smocking technique and show you what this looks like in the end. If we turn this over quickly though, you can already start to see the formation of our first shell shape right here. Alright, so this is our finished piece of shell smocking. So you can see on the side we've got these puffed out shell shapes forming by the stitches we're doing. On the back side, you can see the stitching work that went into making those shell shapes. So what we've got is a zigzag stitch that's kind of going back and forth across these squares. And for this piece of smocking, to get 2 lines of shells, we've got 3 lines of stitchwork on the back. So that piece is finished, and now we're going to put that aside and go on to our next stitch, which is the arrow smocking technique, which is a little tiny bit more complex than shell smocking. So what I've done to start out our arrow smocking is I've done another grid of lines across this piece of fabric, but in this case, instead of being squares, we're looking at rectangles. And they are 1 by 2 rectangles, and in this case I'm using 1 inch by 2 inch rectangles. So to start our arrow smock here, we're going to go down here, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the first corner rectangle here, and I'm going to go up to this little crosshair and just take a nip of the fabric, like I do with the shell smocking. Then I'm going to go all the way across to the other side of that rectangle. Take another nip of the fabric, then go down to kind of the center bottom part of the rectangle, and just take a nip of the fabric about in between both of these dots at the bottom. So what we're doing here is we're creating a triangle, and then we're going to go up here to that first nip and pull all those threads together. So what we should have is 3 little nips of fabric coming together here at that line. After that, do a double stitch to lock it, like we did with the shell smock. And there you go. Now, we're going to go to this line that's kind of showing up right here, and we're going to do a nip of the fabric, and much like when we did the shell smock, this line is going to be left loose. We're not going to pull it tight. So we just give that a little bit of line just to get up to our next spot. And then out from there, on the opposite side, we're going to go to the other side of this rectangle. Grab a nip of fabric, and essentially do what we did on the other side by creating a triangle. Go to the bottom, grab a nip of fabric in the center of the rectangle, the bottom edge. Then up to that starting point on this triangle. What we're going to do is pull that tight and make sure that this thread in between the 2 triangles is still loose. And then we'll just add a little lock stitch of 2 stitches in the same direction. And there we are. So again, we go up a line and leave this one loose. Then we go all the way to the edge, then center it on the bottom line, and then complete our triangle at that first stitch. Then we go up a line, leave it loose, then go out on this side, center it at the bottom, and back over to the edge. Then up a line. So I'm going to go ahead and complete this line and finish it off by tying it tight at the top. Then I'm going to show you what it looks like when you start doing the next line. Alright, so this is what the final lines look like for the first line. I am now done with the first line. I'm going to take you to the second line just to show you how things will line up as you're doing this stitch. Let's go ahead and get started on the second line. So now that we're starting on the second line, we're going to go ahead and we start here. We're going to just do our soft stitch up to this point. So again, we're not pulling this one tight. Then we're going to go over to here, and you see how on this section there's a line that's zigzagging towards this direction? We're going to go ahead and meet that line. Then we're going to do our same old triangle technique. Go down to the bottom, grab a nip in that, go up here, and grab a nip at our original triangle point, then pull those all together. That way we've met that line. Now we're going to go up here, and I'm unfortunately running out of fabric on this side. So for this case, I'm going to go ahead and just skip this side and go up another line to start the next triangle on this side. So what we're doing is we've gone up 2 lines now so that we can meet this point. In most cases, we would have gone over this way and done a triangle over here, but we just don't have enough fabric. So we go up there, do a new triangle, and what you'll notice now is there's a square getting formed right here. So if this was tight and there's another triangle in this direction, we get this perfect little square stitch right here. So now that we've done that one, we're going to nip stitch and go up 2 since we just don't have enough space on the other side to do the opposite triangles. And we're back up to the next point. And we'll find a center point along here to grab. And then make sure that that line's not getting taut. Go back up to our main point and pull that triangle together. Just do one more lock stitch right there. And looks like we're almost done here. So we'll go up, up, where we would have done a triangle right there, and finish off our arrow smocking right here. So this arrow smocking took me, I did about 2 yards of material to start with, and I ended up with about a 1/4 yard, a long 1/4 yard. And in the end, that took me about 3 days to complete. So if you want to do inch-sized smocking, like I did for mine, that will take about 3 days to complete, most likely. And the shell smocking took me about 2 days to complete. And the next texture I'm going to show you took another 1.5 days. So if you really want to do these textured materials, they will take time. But it can definitely be well worth it to just see those beautiful textures come out. So here is our finished piece of arrow smocking. Alright folks, now that we've got our 2 smocking stitches finished, we're going to go ahead and fix those to fusible interfacing, and that's going to make sure that the stitches don't come undone when we have to cut the materials later. So I've got my fusible interfacing here already cut to the right size to match these smocking stitches. And one thing you have to remember when working with fusible interfacing, you're going to be really sad if you accidentally fuse your interfacing to your board instead of to the material you're working with. So make sure that the side that has this shimmery glue on it is facing the back side of your smocking stitch. So now that you have that figured out and make sure that you're doing it in the right order, go ahead and take one of your smocking stitches and the interfacing that goes with it and just flip it over towards the board. So with that laying there, I'm going to take my iron. I have it decently hot for this material. You can play around with your material and make sure that your iron's going to work with it and the heat setting that you have it at. And I'm just going to take the iron and press it against the material. Just work it back and forth. I'm going to know it's fixed when the material on the other side kind of comes through as a texture on the backside. As you can see, you're starting to see a lot of the texture of the stitch on the backside just kind of fixing itself to this piece of material. I'm just going to do it a couple more times to make sure it's good and set. Just trying to work on the material itself and avoid sticking this to my board. Alright, so now if I flip that over, indeed, it is quite fixed to the interfacing. And one last thing I'm going to do is just quickly and softly go over the tops of this, just to make sure these are nice and flattened. Mine's going to be a little bit puffier than this material because this is a bit more thin. So it really depends on what type of material you're using. If you use a thinner material, you're going to get a much flatter scale pattern. So that's done. So as you can see, we've got a nice flattened kind of scale texture on this material. And that is ready for cutting and whatever else. And after I finish this, I'm going to give you guys a quick show of the actual material I'm going to be using for my project, which has already gone through this process. So next we're going to do that with our, that was our shell smocking. Now we're going to do that with our arrow smocking. I'm going to put it down, just kind of press on it to adhese it. When I adhesed my arrow smocking, I noticed it was a lot thicker than the shell, so you might want to go ahead and be careful while you're doing your arrow smocking, otherwise it could get crumpled. So that's looking pretty good. And now again, I'm just going to go over the top, just lightly flatten this down while trying not to grab the glue. So that looks good. So this is what our flattened arrow smocking looks like. And again, this is what our shell smocking looks like, flattened. And those are ready to be cut into the pattern pieces that we're going to use for the project. Alright, so we finished our 2 smocking stitches, and I have one more stitch to teach you before we go ahead and take a look at the materials I have created for the project. And to do that stitch, what I'm essentially going to be doing is taking my sheet of material, starting at one corner, making a tuck like this, and then stitching through it. After that, I'm just going to go down a line of even distance and stitch again and again. Once I've done that all in one direction of the material, I'm going to go ahead and do it in the opposite direction and do it over. So you're going to get a good example of this when I go ahead and do it on the machine. So we take our material here and we go up to the corner, and up near the corner, just make our first pinch. Then we're going to go ahead and put that through. Pull it out, and there's our first pinch. We're going to do a second now. I'm going to go ahead and do these at about inch intervals so you guys can get a quick example. So there we are. We've got 2 pinches. Let's go ahead and make our third. And our fourth. And let's go ahead and call that good for now. So now that we've got 4 stitches, this is essentially what I would do all the way across the fabric. But for now we're just going to do 4 so you can get a quick example. To start the other way, what you do is you go up here, make sure you're doing it on the side that has the textured pinches, and you're going to fold that side over. So the undetailed side is going to be in. And you'll go through. We got our first one. And again, just like we did the first time, in the first direction. And I'll do 2 more, and then we'll take a look at it. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. So what you're essentially creating is these either rectangles or squares that are created by the texture bunching of fabric going in either direction. When I did mine, I made them a little bit more tilted so that they'd become less like these squares and more like kind of diamond shaped and rectangular. And that's what I used to create the fabric that's going to be the sleeves for Daenerys' outfit. These are all the finished pieces of the textured material. This piece right here, which is the texture I just showed you, took a day and a half to create. It was about 3 yards of material. The shell smocking, right here, was about 2 yards of material and took 2 days to create. And over here at the very end, the arrow smocking, it was about 2 yards of material and took 3 days to create. So in total, we're looking at about a week's worth of time in creation. Now that we've done all of the pre-setup of all of our materials, made all of our textured stuff, we are now on to one of the harder parts of the dress, which is patterning. And I'm just going to show you a good overlay of what the top of the dress is going to look like in patterned pieces. So we've got piece 1, piece 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, I'm actually already done a put together of that pattern because I wanted to make sure it worked before I gave you guys the format of how I created it. So if we look at the dress form, we've got these pieces already sewn together to test them out and make sure that they're going to make the shape that we're looking for in the dress. And I actually highly recommend that if you have extra materials laying around, you actually do this with your own pattern before you actually create the dress with the materials that you're creating. Because they are, as you are going to find out, really difficult to create or really expensive to buy. So, and when we're looking here, what we're looking at is this is piece 1, the front panel that goes around the waist. Then we've got piece 2, which is this side panel. Piece 3, which are these 2 back panels. Then we've got piece 4 over here on the front, which makes up this shape right here and has 2 darts right here for the bust line. Then we go to the back side again, and we've got piece 5 right here with 1 dart on each side for the back line. And so now that gives you a visual reference of what these pieces are looking like. I'm actually going to sit down with you and I'm going to go ahead and show you exactly how I patterned those pieces out and what measurements you need to be thinking about while doing that. Before you do the patterning section of this video, please go and watch this video in the annotation or description below that I created for 21 dress measurements. It's It's going to be a great help, and I'm actually going to be referencing numbers from that video so that you can quickly figure out which measurements you need for which parts of this pattern. Before completing this section, please go ahead and take those measurements and actually get the measurements you need on hand before creating your pattern. It's going to be a great help, and it's going to make this a lot faster for you. So to get started on the first pattern piece 1, what I did is I took measurement 5, or center bust measurement, and I used that to figure out what length I wanted this lower edge to be. That way I knew that there would be a tapered shape to the front of the dress that would end right about under the bust line. To find the height of this piece, you're next going to have to take measurement 14 and minus measurement 6 from it. And what 6 is it's just measuring a portion of your breast to your sternum. And what that's going to do is it's going to take the rounded breast factor out of measurement 14 and allow you to find out what size you need to reach the breast line and go down to the waist. So again, measurement 14 minus measurement 6 equals this line right here. What you're going to do is just determine how long you want this slope to be. This will end up determining how you measure lots of other portions of the pieces around the edge. So what you're going to do is just determine how slanted you want this curve to be right here. And once you figure that out, find the distance from the center of your pattern piece, and that will be the length on one side. What you're going to do after that is take this measurement right here, and you're going to copy that to this side to make it even. Now that you've found all of the measurements you need for piece 1, there is one last thing you actually have to do before you complete this piece. And what you have to do that is you have to add a 1/2 inch to all edges. Now that's if you like sewing with a 1/2 inch. This is actually a good portion and point to determine how big you want the edges of your seam to be. If you are a beginner sewer and you need a little bit more space, you might want to make that 3/4 of an inch. But for me, I like to do 1/2 inch seams, so what I did is to all the measurement edges, I just bunched it out about a 1/2 inch, and I'm going to use that as my sewing seam. Now don't forget to do that with all the rest of the pieces you're working on. You're going to be sorely disappointed if you just do the 1/2 inch seam on your first piece and don't do it for the rest and realize that you've made things a bit too small. The next piece you're actually going to be working on is piece 3. And piece 3 is essentially made from a template of piece 1. So to make piece 3, you're going to do essentially 1/2 of piece 1. But on top of that, you're going to make sure that this seam on this edge would be 3/4 of an inch and not just 1/2. This is important because you're going to need a little bit more edge on the back side where you're going to be doing buttonholes and lace-up work. So you're going to need a little bit more space on that edge for that piece. So make sure that you add 1/4 inch space to this back edge right here. Other than that, this is an exact replica of piece number 1. Piece 2 is the next piece we're going to do. And essentially what it is it's whatever's left over after creating piece 3 and piece 1. So to make piece 2, make sure that you have added up your waist measurement. Also, you're going to want, for this pattern that is not included in my list of 21 measurements, a bra strap measurement, which is essentially a measurement of the body that is right underneath the breast line. So right underneath the breast, you're going to measure around all the way to the back, and that is your bra strap measurement. And for my bra strap measurement and my model, I ended up getting a 30. So once you've got your bra strap measurement, measure pieces 3 and 1 together. So what you're going to want to do is take piece 3 and piece 1, take the lower and upper edges of those pieces, add the lower edges together, and add the upper edges together. Remember, since you're going to be having 2 pieces of piece 3, you need to double that size. So, once you find out how much space that's taking up, you're going to look at the lower edge as the waist measurement, and you're going to look at the upper edge as the bra strap measurement. Whatever you got for the bra strap measurement, you need to make up the difference between 2 pieces for piece 2. And you're also going to do the same thing for the waist measurement on the lower edge of piece 2 for the waist measurement. So, this edge down here is going to be whatever room you need left for the waist, divided in 2. And this piece, or edge up here, is going to be whatever you need for the bra strap measurement left, divided by 2. So in my case, I was looking at 14 inches for the upper part, and I believe I was looking at 14 inches for the lower part too, surprisingly. So what I ended up doing is I added just about 7 inches together on the bottom, and I think it was just a little bit over 7 inches on the top. After that, again, remember that you need to add your 1/2 inch edges. And also remember, while you're doing all these measurements, not to include those 1/2 inch edges while you're taking those measurements for new areas. Piece 2 should be the same heights as piece 3 and piece 1. Once you get those measurements for the top edge and the lower edge of piece 2, you are ready to move on to the next piece, which is probably the most complex piece in this entire equation. Here is piece number 4. For piece number 4, we're going to need our bra strap measurement again, that one measurement that is not included in my list of 21. And what we're going to be doing with that measurement is cutting it in half. So we're going to take half of the bra strap measurement, then we're going to divide that in 2. What that's going to give us is 1 piece of number 4. Because you remember, there's going to be 2 pieces of number 4 to make the front of the dress. And there's also going to be 2 pieces of number 5 to make the back of the dress. That way, what we're doing is we're cutting that measurement in half and making it so that the edges are going to line up under the arms. So to start that, we take 1/4 of the bra strap measurement for this piece, lower edge right here. Then we're going to take measurement 6, which is the shape of a breast. And so I'm going to take my measurement 6 and I'm actually going to add it into this, and that's going to be the darts right here. So you're taking your bra strap measurement, dividing it by 4, taking that amount, then you're adding measurement 6 to that. And what I had was about, 7.5 for 1/4 of the bra strap measurement for my model, and I had 3 inches for the measurement 6. And I added those together to make this lower edge. After that, I took measurement 6 again, and what I did with it is I measured this direction with measurement 6, and I made that the center of my darts. And the reason I did that is because if I take measurement 6, again, which represents the shape of a breast, or at least half a breast, and I move in that direction, what I know is that I'm going to have this dart, the center of these 2 darts, line up with the center of the breast, which is going to make a good fit for the cup of the breast. And so after that, I made these darts about 3 inches high. Again, that it would be number 6. So measurement 6 was also used to measure in this way and then measure up this way. And that way we have a really good cup-shaped area for the breast on the lower edge. So the measurement I used to get the slant of the sternum was a little bit more interesting. So what I decided to do is take about 6/7 of the sternum length. So essentially the sternum divided by 7 times 6 to get this length right here. And it just, to me, after looking at images of the models and looking at how the dress fit on Daenerys, that number just seemed to make sense. for about how long that should be, and hopefully that will work more on your models as well, or yourself if you're making this for yourself. And if not, just go ahead and take a measurement and see about how high you want that to be. It's a little less fast and hard. Now, the only thing about this area right here is I decided I wanted mine to be in about 1.5 inches. Essentially somewhere close to about half of measurement 6, so it would reach about halfway up the breast. So the other thing about the shape of the dress on Daenerys I noticed was about how far these edges of the v-neck went away from the center of her body. And what I realized is it was about 1/3 of measurement 5, which is the nipple to nipple measurement. And so what I did is I decided to just divide measurement 5 by 3. And that's how I got about how far from the center that angle should go, right there. So that's how I got that measurement. You can always eyeball that a little bit too. So for the armpit line, or essentially this line right here, I wanted to find out how high this should be. And again, I just kind of eyeballed how it was sitting on the actress, and to me it looked like it would be about 4/7 of the bust to waistline. So I just decided to make that about 4/7 of that. And that came out pretty good, sat pretty well on the form. And the only other measurements I had left for this was this line right here, and about how thick the strap would be. So I decided that just kind of looking at how it would fit, that for me about 6 inches sounded good. You can always take a measurement on your model of just kind of like angling about how far you want it to slant before it evens out around the rest of the form. So for me, about 6 inches on each side was good. And for the strap, I decided to make my shoulder strap 2 inches thick. Again, that's another measurement that's a lot easier to mess with. So if you want a thicker strap, you can have that. If you want a thinner one, you can do that too, but 2 inches sounded good to me. And again, remember to always have a 1/2 inch around the entire pattern piece, because you're going to regret it if you don't. And that is it for piece 4. So we are now on to piece 5, the last piece for the bodice. Alright, so this is piece 5, and this is the back piece to the bodice. So to start this piece, I actually ended up using piece 4, and I can show you exactly how I did that. So here's piece 4, and as you can see, it lines up pretty well with piece number 5 at this edge. And that makes a lot of sense because you want your seams to line up pretty perfectly. You don't want to have to be cutting pieces off. And the one thing with piece 5 that I changed a bit is I wanted to have a little bit more shoulder room because I want to be able to adjust that on my model. So I ended up making a lot more of this shoulder strap than is probably necessary, and what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to measure it to the model, and then I'm going to actually make a seam there and then tuck it in, and hopefully that'll create a little bit of padding that will also help hold the dress up on her. So that's why I have a bunch of extra shoulder space here. You can also take a shoulder around measurement, which is one of the last measurements in my dress measurement video, and if you do that, then you can actually probably get pretty close to how you want it. It's just I want to check out how it's going to affect how she moves. So that's why I'm going to actually measure that one directly onto my model. Anyways, from there, the dress line follows all the way back and stays the same height all the way across the back. So none of that has been adjusted. And really, the only other measurement I wanted to add was one more 1-inch dart at the bottom. And actually, when I'm actually going to do my dress, one thing I noticed is I actually want to have that dart a little closer to here. So I'm actually going to move that right now. And you can go ahead and decide if you want to do that too. The reason I want to do that is because it's going to line up a lot better with the other seam that's in that area. And that just makes a little bit more sense, and it'll make it a little more visually pleasing. Now, the one thing you do want to make sure with piece 5 is that since you're adding this dart, you need to add an inch to this lower measurement. Again, we're going to be using 1/4 of the bra strap measurement, like we did for the piece 4, the front piece. And so you're going to need to add 1 inch here. You also need to make sure that instead of having 1/2 inch seam on this side, like the back piece for the lower pieces, you have to have 3/4 of an inch. So make sure that you make those two adjustments. Instead of having 1/2 inch here, it has to be 3/4, and here you have to add an extra inch. And other than that, you are finished. So this is the last piece for the upper portion, which is really, those are the hard and fast pieces for this dress. And I'm going to show you how to make the other pieces that I'm going to create, especially the sleeves and the front panels and stuff like that. But this is going to be the hardest part of this dress. A lot of other things are very easy to fudge. So now that I have those pieces created, I'm going to go ahead and use them to cut out my pattern. One thing you really want to remember when doing this, especially since if you're like me and you're doing it the way I did and you create a whole bunch of this smocking material and it takes you days, make sure you are cutting your pieces properly. You want to have them facing opposite directions if you're making doubles, because they have to face different directions. And if you don't do that, you're really going to regret it when you cut through your fabric and find out, oh my gosh, I have to make a whole bunch more smocking because I forgot to cut it the right way. As they always say, measure 3 times, check 3 times, cut once. So for the top, the pieces I cut out for 1, 2, and 3 was just a basic cream colored normal fabric. And beyond that outer piece of fabric, I cut out 2 pieces of lining per piece that is going on the costume. And for pieces 4 and 5, I cut out our shell smocking. And then also a piece of lining per piece of shell smocking. And now what I have to do is I have to prepare these pieces for sewing. And there's going to be a lot of intense work put into the sewing, so I'm really worried that the shell smocking, as well as other pieces, might come undone or get a little bit out of hand when I'm trying to sew them together. And in order to make sure that doesn't happen, I'm going to go ahead and do a little tiny, like 1/4 inch seam all the way around the edges of these pieces. And that way it will make sure that they do not get frayed or come off of their backing or anything like that while I'm doing any of the sewing processes. So for the shell smocking pieces essentially 4 and 5, we're going to go ahead and just do that with the backing that's already on them, the fusible interfacing. But for pieces 1, 2, and 3, I actually am going to be doing a little bit of boning work later on. And because of that, while I'm doing this process, I'm actually going to add an extra piece of fabric to the back, which is why we have one piece of backing for pieces 4 and 5 per piece, but we have 2 for pieces 1, 2, and 3. So for pieces 1, 2, and 3, I'm going to go ahead and grab one here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the piece that's going to be the exterior piece of fabric for the outfit. I'm going to add one of the backing pieces to it, and then I'm going to do that seam, that 1/4 inch seam all the way around the edges. And that way, when we get to boning these pieces, there's going to be a little more strength there and less of a chance of the material breaking. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to get back to you and show you a sample of what I did. Alright, so I finished doing the 1/4 inch seams around the edges. So as you can see here, I have just taken the edges, done a really thin seam around the edge. For these ones, these are the lower pieces, and I just attached the interfacing to the outer pieces. And with these ones, instead of doing that, I just did the 1/4 inch seam all the way around the edges and just made sure that this smocking is well attached to the interfacing and will not come undone when I have to do intense work with it later. Okay, so I've got those seam edges done. Now it's time to start actually figuring out how to put this together. Now I'm a big fan of doing good workflow for seam work so that you have as few raw and open seams as possible. And you put it together in such a way that you have to do as little edge-to-edge seam work as possible. So, the first stitches you're going to have to do after doing your darts right here and right here are these edges. So I'm taking piece 4 and 5 and I'm just putting the shoulder strap edges together. And I'm going to go ahead and put a needle through that. So I'm also going to do this with the lining. So take 2 pieces, stick them together. And now while doing this with the lining, I just want to make sure that I've got a piece it's going to match. So this one should match this piece. And make sure that your needle's on the inside when matching. And that works. So that piece is good to go. And now I need to just quickly do that with the other piece and make sure we're going to be attaching these in the right order. So to make sure I'm doing it in the right order, I'm actually going to flop. So this piece will be on the wrong side, and this one will too. But what that should do now is if I attach these, I should be able to reverse them and they should match when I flip them so that the needle's on the inside. Voila! There we go. So our linings and our upper pieces are all ready for that first stitch. And since we're going to be doing our darts and our shoulder stitch on these pieces, we can also go ahead and get our bottom pieces together. So since these are all ready to go on their first step, the lower pieces are pretty much all going to just be one step. And since we're already going to be going to the sewing machine to do these, we might as well get these done as well. So take part 1, which is your very angular piece for the front, and we're going to remember that this angular, this larger edge is going up top. So we're going to take that and we're going to take part 2 and we are going to add the slightly larger edge to part 2 on top as well. And I'm just going to pin those together. There we go. Now let's take the other part, pin it to the other side. Here we are. And then we're going to take the back piece. Again, the angular larger edge goes up top. So go on this side. And you want that flat edge furthest out because that's going to become where you do your lace up. All right. All those edges that are going to get sewn together are now pinned together. So we will take care of that while we take care of the first part of the topmost piece. So I'm just going to quickly do that with the linings as well. Alright, so our lining and our exterior piece for the lower part are now ready to go through the machine, and we are ready to put our straps and our darts through the machine. I will get back to you when those are done, and I will show you. We've got our darts sewn in place. See right there. We've got our shoulder sewn at the seam, and our other dart. And we've done that with all of the pieces of the upper half, including the linings. And we've gone ahead and gotten the sewing done for our waistband. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the waistband pieces aside for now. We'll deal with those a little later. Now, the next step we have to do with our nice plush smocked pieces is take the linings and match them up inside out. So we need to make sure the right sides are together. There we are. And what I want to do is I want to put pins in to kind of mark what we're doing next. I'm going to put a pin right at the point where there be that little dip that connects together at the center, right there. And I'm just going to go from that point upwards and just kind of start pinning the corners. So we're working along the upper edge. Make sure these seams are together decently well. Okay, so I've got this upper edge pinned, starting at that one point, and now I'm going to do some pinning along the inner edge, pretty much just where the sleeve holes will be. So get that corner matched up. So now what we have is we have all of this rim just starting right after the point where these two pieces are going to connect together in the front, all the way around and all the way to this back edge right here. All that is now connected. And I'm going to add one last edge in, and that's this one, where the buttonholes are going to go. So what we're going to end up doing is, starting here, you're not going to sew this edge in the front. You're not going to sew that very lower edge we created where the two pieces are going to connect together. Instead, you're going to sew starting at this point during the V-neck, at the very bottom of the V-neck. And you're going to go all around this upper edge. And once you get to this back section, you're going to do your 3/4 inch seam down this edge. Now, afterwards, you're going to go ahead and go to this inner edge, and again, doing a 1/2 inch seam, go all the way around this sleeve section. You're not going to do these edges down here, only following the curve. So I'm going to go ahead and pin the other piece, and then I'm going to put them through the machine and give you guys an example of what that looks like. Alright, so I went ahead and got my edges sewed and was going to try and push them through, but it turns out mine is a little bit too thick for that. So depending on the fabric you're going to use, it might be a little bit too thick to go through this narrow channel. So I ended up seam ripping the upper edge of mine and then letting both edges through. And I would recommend, if you do have to seam rip anywhere on the dress to get it to properly go through, I would recommend this straight upper edge because it's going to be the easiest area to sew back together when we do the next step. So that is through now, and we are actually on to the next step, which is going to be sewing these edges together. So these are the sides, and you want to match those edges up together. What you're going to do is you're going to go through both the two main edges and then the lining edges like this in a straight line. And then what's going to happen is you're going to pull these back down, and you're going to have a fully closed armhole area. So I'm going to go ahead and put some needles through there. And there we go. So that'll get sewn together. I'm going to do that to the other piece. There we are. And then what we can do is we can take our two pieces here. Let's line them up so they're both face down. We're going to take these two flaps in the front area, where they would join together, and we're going to do the exact same thing we did with the armhole to the very front of the bodice. Those two flaps that we didn't sew down earlier. And what's going to happen there is once that's done, this is going to be one whole piece together. So after I do those stitches, let's go ahead and let you know what we're doing after that, so you can go ahead and do that too. So after you get the arms connected here, and then you get the front connected there, what you can go ahead and do is, starting on one edge, just do a very small 1/4 inch stitch all along these edges, just kind of keeping these nicely together, the lining and the front. And that way you're going to create kind of a nice line that's going to keep the shape of this bodice and make it not have to be ironed all the time. This will also give it a much flatter shape, which will be nice on especially the front of the bodice. Make it look a little more lightweight. So yeah, so get your armholes put together, get the front of the bodice connected, and then go ahead and do a 1/4 inch refining stitch right along all these edges. You're going to want to do that all across the top, even through this V-neck area, and then you're going to want to do that in the armhole areas as well. And since I had to peel mine open to get mine through, I'm going to go ahead and do that stitch to this area as well to finish it off. Alright, I will see you after that is done. So I finished doing the sewing for the bodice of the dress, and to do that we got these armholes sewn together at the seams. We did that to the front section, and then we went around all of the edges on the top as well as the armhole areas and sewed this together so that they would lay a little flatter. So now we're on to working on boning. And to start boning, what you're going to do is you're going to take those lower sections, the part that's going to go underneath the bodice. So we have to add bones to these little slit sections right here, and then these two sections as well. What that's going to do is it's going to just add a little bit of support to the dress and make sure that when the wearer is wearing it, there's less wrinkling on this section, which is a lot softer. So to add boning, you're going to have to make a casing, first of all. Unless you are using plastic boning, which already comes with a casing. I use coated steel, which has a layer on it that makes it machine washable. And that means I have to add a casing to my boning so that I can sew it onto the bodice. And this casing is really simple. It's literally just 2 strips of fabric, like so, and then you sew lines down the center of it, really decently close together. I use 1/4 inch boning, so I make mine just a little bit bigger than 1/4 inch, about 1/2 inch, and then you just make long strips of this that you can cut up. So I've got my casing already set. If you need to sew yours, go ahead and do that now. And on to boning. There's a lot of different kinds of boning you can use. This corset is not going to need a lot of heavy duty boning, so it would honestly be okay to use plastic boning in this case. But for all my corsets, I am currently using coated steel, which looks like this. And it's just a flexible piece of steel that has been coated with a machine washable coating, so I can actually throw my dresses through the wash if they have this without worry about rust. So what you're going to need to do is take the piece that you're going to be adding the bones to, or the front piece. So here's my front piece, and I need to find out what bone length is going to work. And one thing you want to do with this is you want to have room on either side for sewing. So I'm going to go ahead and say leave about 3/4 inch for sewing on the edges. So we're only going to put bones in that are going to make sure that we have about 3/4 inch room for sewing. That's about right. So let's see what I'm looking at here. This is probably about 3.5 inches long. So at least for these front seams, I'll be putting these here, which will leave me 3/4 inch sewing on the edges. And for these back ones, let's see. For these back ones, I can actually probably go up 1 inch. No, we'll do same length. So I've got 4 bones here. They're going to go in these spots. That's just going to add a little bit of support to this piece and make it not wrinkle when people are wearing it. And now that I've got those picked out, I'm going to go ahead and cut out pieces of this so that I can slip these inside and then sew the edges together and have this ready to get sewed onto this. So I'm going to go ahead and get my bones prepared and then I'll come back. Alright, so we now have our finished bones. And as you can see, a little bit of edging, enough space along here that I'll be able to have plenty of room to sew them onto the fabric. Good flex in there. So what I'm essentially doing now, really simple, you're just going to spread these seams apart, like so. You're going to place these down the center. You want to make sure you have about 3/4 spacing on each side from where the bone actually touches. And then you're just going to sew a seam along this edge and that edge. Really easy. So I'm going to go ahead and sew my bones in, and then I will get back to you and we'll show you the next step. So I went ahead and got the bones sewn on like I said I would. Again, you can see a line right here and right there. And that's how I did all 4 of the bones. But I went ahead and started with the next step. I'm going to show you what that is. So after that, I took the front piece, which is the one with the bones, and then I took the lining as well, which is the one without the bones, and I pinned those so that they would match up with the upper piece. To do that, I went ahead and just eyeballed the center point of the piece where the dividing line is in the front, and I pinned the front to that and then just kind of worked my way out, and what I've got is pretty good. It's about approximately 1/2 to 3/4 inch edge left over, which is gonna be what we use. So again, the front is pinned facing the front. So you want the sides that are gonna be shown together kind of facing each other, and you want the sides you're not gonna see facing out. And same thing with the lining. The good side of the lining is facing the good side of the interior lining, and you want the bad side facing out, or the messy side. And so with that done, I'm going to go ahead and sew those on. So I'm just going to get to probably about 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch seam in here, and then I'm going to pull these needles out and we'll go to the next step. Alright, so the top is now at a waiting stage while we work on the skirts. For the skirts, here's my plan. So when we look at this dress, what we've got are 2 different layers. We've got an upper layer that has a panel that sits along the front edge. Then we have some side panels and then a back panel. And for my dress, since I'm going to make it lace up, it's going to have a back panel that I stitched together that has room for buttonholes along here. So that's the top layer of the dress. Underneath that though, there's also a layer of pleated material. And we're going to get to that secondary. But first what we're going to do is we're going to work on getting these 5 panels figured out. So we've got the front panel, then we've got the 2 side panels, and then we've also got the back panel. Now, since we've got 5 panels and the dress that we are working on has 5 waist pieces, what I'm going to end up doing is actually just take the size, the bottom edges of the waist pieces and use those for the top end of the skirt. That way we don't have to actually end up worrying about the waist size, because that's already going to be taken care of with our upper edges. So, the only measurement we have to consider while making these pieces is the waist to ankle length. And with that in mind, just make sure that the length of the material you're cutting is going to be at least that long. So the few things we have to think about while cutting out these pieces is, we already know the top of this. We know that this has to be at least waist to ankle length. We probably should add a few extra inches of material at the bottom edge. And then we want to have a slight slant for this first piece, because we want to be able to see the pleats coming out on either edge. For this one, we want essentially the same thing. We already know the top edge is going to be the same size as the side panel pieces. And we want this to go at least a couple inches longer than we need. And we want these slants probably to be a little bit bigger. The front edge should probably be a little bit less slanted than the back edge, because I think we want a little bit more material hanging off the back side. And we want to be able to see the pleats on the front side. So less angling towards the front edge, more angling towards the back side that's going to meet up with these pieces. This is our back panel pieces. So again, these pieces are going to match up with the sizing of our back panel pieces already. A couple extra inches. And we should have a lot more flare with these ones, because these are going to be the ones that add a little bit more flare for the back edge of the dress. So what I'm going to end up doing here is I'm just going to go ahead and cut my pieces out and then show you guys what my pieces ended up looking like after I've cut them out. Alright, so we are now looking at the pattern pieces that are going to be used to put this dress together. For each piece we have an exterior piece, then we also have a lining. And what I'm going to be doing is taking all of the main pieces and attaching them by sewing all the way around the edges except the very top. And after that, I'm going to go ahead and flip those inside out and then start using them as the pieces that are going to be used for the dress. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to put those together afterwards. So I've got all of the pieces cut out now, and each of them correspond with their waistband piece. And what I'm going to end up doing is there is a exterior piece and a lining piece for each one. That means there is 2 pieces for the very front, then there are 4 pieces of the side panel since there are 2 side panels, then there are also 4 pieces of the back since there are 2 back panels. What I'm going to do first is take each of these pieces, line them up with a liner piece, and I'm going to sew those together, except leave the very top where they would meet the waistband open. And then I'm going to flip them inside out. So before I sew these together, I just want to give you guys a good look at these pieces. So what we're looking at here is the front pieces, which correspond with piece number 1. And these are folded in half. So what I did is I cut these on the fold and just got a straight down the center and then just kind of belled them just a tiny bit as they went along. For piece number 2, like I was talking about earlier, I left one edge straight and then I had one edge bell out. For piece number 3, or the back panels, I had both edges bell out a bit. And the pieces that I did not give you a good look at beforehand are the pleated pieces. So I'm going to use this shimmery sheer material for my pleats. And I decided I should cut out a few pieces for the back of those so that it's not completely see-through. And I'm going to pleat these front pieces, and then I'm just going to kind of work these back pieces onto the rest of the skirts once they go together. Alright, so I went ahead and sewed the linings to the dress front sections here with the skirt pieces. And after I did that, I got them pinned up to the edges here. Now they're still inside out, and they're going to have to be flipped. But first, what I wanted to do is make sure that they're going to fit the skirt and bodice well. So to do that, I went ahead and just pinned them all up here. Then I took pins, and anywhere where it seemed like things were a little bit too large, I went ahead and added some pins to those areas as a line. So you can see the lines here. I noticed that this piece was a little bit too large, so I'm going to actually put some lines in here with pins, and then what I'm going to do after that is take this back onto the sewing machine and just sew right down these lines. Afterwards, I'm going to end up trimming this, and I'll just trim all the way around the edge to follow the new lines I've created. So another place that I've done this is at the bottom of the dress. Okay, so down here at the bottom of the dress, we're doing the same thing. I went ahead and I'm using this as a way to trim the size of the dress before I turn these pieces inside out. So we've got lines going across the bottom of the dress where I want to trim. So now that that part is done, I'm going to go ahead and take all these pieces off of the dress form and go put them through my machine and sew in those new lines. Then I'm going to take some scissors and just trim all the edges to about 1/2 inch. Alright, so I just finished putting my pieces through the machine, trimming them up, and I've turned most of them inside out, and I just figured I'd show you the last one as I do it. So to keep track of my pieces while they're going through the machine and afterwards, I just quickly laid them out like this so that they will be easy to keep track of while I'm sewing them together. Now the only piece that hasn't been turned inside out is our center piece, and it's so simple. You just reach in, grab the bottom, and pull it inside out. And then make sure that your corners are nicely tucked out. So since I just finished doing this part, we're going to do one more thing to these pieces before we actually sew them together. And that is we're going to, much like we did on the bodice, we're going to go ahead and do a 1/4 inch seam all the way down the edges to keep them nice and flat. And I will show you that once I am done. Alright, so I have gotten our 1/4 inch seam sewn all around the edges, much like we did with the bodice. I've done that for all 5 pieces. We still have left the tops open, but that's okay. They're just going to get hidden underneath seam work anyways. And now I have all 5 pieces lined up here, and I've got all the edges that are going to get sewn together matching up. And what I'm going to do now is just start at one end, take those pieces, get them sewn together, and then grab the next piece. So when I'm sewing my pieces together, this is what you're going to do. You're going to take these 2 edges, you're going to put them right up next to each other, maybe even just overlay them by like a 1/4 inch. And then you're going to just do either a zigzag stitch or some other kind of decorative stitch that is going to go across from one side to the other and hold them together. Since my machine has a lot of decorative stitches, I'm going to go ahead and pick one of those, and I will show you guys once I am done. Alright, so I've got all of my panels sewn together. As you can see, the front panel is still open, so I just sewed about 1 inch to 2 inches down on each side. And there is only 1 stitch left that has to be done for the skirt before we actually attach it to the bodice, and that is the stitch at the back. So to do the stitch at the back, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go about 10 inches down, just pick a spot, put a needle right in there, and that'll be my starting point for the stitch. And we're going to leave the stuff above the needle unsewn, and then we're only going to sew the stuff below the needle. And what this is going to end up becoming is the opening flap that you put your buttonholes on, and then this whole section will be laced up. So I'm going to start sewing down here, and then once this is done, I'm going to show you how to attach it to the bodice. Alright, so I just finished the back seam, so we now have this nice open area to put our buttonholes along, and that's going to become the ending of the lace-up section. So what I'm going to be doing next is attaching this to the actual bodice, and I'm going to be putting right side in like this, where we have this open area, and then I'm going to be folding that up and then pinning it down and sewing that. I'm going to show you once I have it all pinned together, and then I'm going to go ahead and sew it. So I now have the dress skirts pinned to the lining of the dress, only the lining, and what we're going to do is we're going to sew through this section first, and then after that we're going to add, we're going to flip it over and stitch it through the main section of the dress. But to take a quick look at how I did this, I just attached pins to the points where they match up with their skirt sections and the bodice sections. And then if I had any like puckering, and I had some puckering at the back for the size, I just did a pleat, and I pleated it so that the pleat would face to the back of the dress on the outside. And on the edges of the dress, you have about half an inch to 3/4 of an inch to tuck over later. So make sure you've got that space on the edge. If you have any pleats, they face towards the back. And then you are ready to go and sew on the skirts to the lining. Okay, so we now have our lining and our skirt sewn together. So all we have to do now is put the flap with the bones towards the skirt, and we're going to flip the edge on this in a little bit, probably about a ½ inch. And then you're going to pin it on like that, and on these corners, you see, you're going to just tuck these in when you're getting ready to sew, and pin those down too. And then you're going to sew this whole edge, then go down here, sew this whole edge from the side where you see the bones on the front, and then you're pretty much going to have a finished dress body, except for the pleated underskirts and the sleeves. And I will show you how to get to those steps next. Okay, so we have our finished skirt body now. It is now attached, as you can see here. And there's only one thing we have left to get done for the skirts, and that is add the pleated underlayers. So what I have here cut out is 2 pieces of opaque material and then 2 pieces of the shimmery sheer material. And I want to make sure I've got the right length, and it's really easy and quick to do here. So all I've got to do is pin this material on at the height of the skirts, go down to the bottom here, and I'm going to be cutting this material to the height of the rest of the dress skirts. Once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and just take these 4 panels and put them through a sewing machine to get the edges refined. After that, I'll be pleating the materials, and I'll show you how to do that next. Alright, so I'm going to quickly show you how to pleat material. Really simple. Some people actually do this with boards where they cut out the exact shapes of the pleats they want. I'm going to show you the simplest version of pleating. So all we're really doing is we're folding over our material like so, taking our iron and just rolling it over that material. We're going to have to do it a little slow because the heat is what's going to be setting this. So that's our first pleat. After that, just going to go a little bit further down the fabric. How about this far for a pleat this big? Roll this fabric back into it, and now you're going to create your second pleat. You can also stack them a little closer together, and that's what I ended up doing with my dress pleats, and I'm going to show you that in a second. Alright, and if you do a nice, good, thorough job of that, when they come apart, you're going to have a permanent kind of flex in your fabric. And now I'm going to go ahead and show you my actual pleated material. So here is one of the front panels that's going to go underneath the skirts right there. I've already done my pleats, but I did mine a little bit closer together like I was saying. So they're kind of rolling into each other a bit. And I just took that backing material and I just quickly pleated it by hand. We're not actually going to do a full pleat of that So we just need it to be about the same size as the material in the front. So you just kind of hand pleat that, pin it together, and then what we're going to do is we're going to stick that underneath this edge, and we're going to use the seams at the edge of the skirt, these seams right here. We're going to try and get them as close to the edge as possible, so you might have to go down a little bit to about there. But once you get down to about that point, you're just going to attach your fabric edges, both of them, to this edge, and then you're just going to do one more single line down these rows, right here and right here. And that way the material will splay when it opens, like so. And we'll have a nice accent in there for our dress. Alright, so once I do that, I'll get back to you and show you the results. So we officially have a finished dress body. The only part that is missing on this dress now is the sleeves and embellishments. So I went ahead and sewed in my pleats and my back panels. This is what it looks like on the outside. We just did a stitch down each edge. And now I'm going to turn it inside out and show you what it looks like on the other side. So these tops of these pleats are attached to the waistband, and then we just kind of go in a triangle motion down from there to attach them to the two edges. We go ahead and push all this excess to the side because we want it to lay flat. We don't want to make it puff up at the top, so that's how I got mine to lay flat. So the next step before we actually get onto sleeves is I'm going to add my buttonholes to the back here, all the way down to this section from the top. And then we are ready to lace the dress up on the form and determine how big we want these shoulder straps to be. Then we're gonna go ahead and make the sleeves and add them on. After that, all that's left is embellishments. So all the buttonholes are on now. Go ahead and take a look at these. They're pretty close together. When you're doing a dress that laces all the way up in the back, you do have to keep your buttonholes pretty close together. Now mine are already cut open and ready to add the laces to. So I'm just going to lace this up now, and then I'm going to go ahead and start showing you guys how to do the sleeves. So I'm going to take you guys through a couple of steps right here. The first one is, I went ahead and created, just using a bit of brass wire, my little front clasp here, and I've got that sewn into place. Now, about how wide you want it to be is going to be completely up to you, and how much chest visibility you want. And so I got that sewn on, and you have to do this before you figure out how wide your shoulder straps are going to be, because that is going to determine how wide you need them to be. So after I did that, my next task is to go ahead and take these shoulder straps and make sure that they're the right length, or the right length. And to do that, you're going to take your shoulder round measurement, or essentially you're going to be taking a measurement around the back of your shoulders, above your breasts, and right like that. And you're going to be using that measurement to essentially create how wide the dress is at this top level. So to adjust for this, I opened this up about 1 inch for my model, because this form is 1 inch bigger than my model. And then I'm going to go ahead and take these straps, and I'm going to get them as close as possible, pin them, cut them. Then very carefully I'm going to do an overstitch, turn them slightly inwards, and then sew a seam on the inside. That way the straps will be readjusted to her size. So the next thing I'm going to be doing after that is creating the sleeves. And I went ahead and got my sleeves cut out so I can show you guys what those shapes look like. So these are so simple. it's just a big rectangle. Because what it's essentially going to be doing is draping off the edge right here. And if you make anything triangular shaped at the bottom or top, it's not going to drape very well. So it's just a simple rectangular drape. And I've got a sheer lining cut out for that in the exact same size. And I decided to do a little extra detail work using the arrow smocking we made earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my sleeves draped like this, like I showed you, across there. Then I'm going to have my arrow smocking on top, like so. And I decided I wanted a bit of a slant in my arrow smocking, so that's why we see the shape we see here. I want it to be a little shorter in the front, and I want it to drape more in the back across this piece. So to get this sewn, this is what we're going to do. We're going to just put our piece down here. I'm going to put our arrow smocking on top of it. Oh yes, when you're cutting out your arrow smocking, make sure you cut out opposites, because you're going to be really unhappy if you cut out a bunch of smocking and your pieces are the exact same direction. So after that, I'm just going to pop my smocking on top of my textured fabric, tuck these edges under, and then I'm going to sew it down. Once that's done, I'm going to put this backing on top of all this, and I'm going to go ahead and sew on 3 sides. And I'm actually going to sew this top edge, then these 2 edges, and then I'm going to leave the bottom edge open. And then I'm going to turn it inside out and then sew that lower edge. And that should create our sleeve. So I hope that's not too much information right now. That will get us pretty much to the finish of the dress, and anything you do after that is just for extra dazzle and extra detail. Okay, so I went ahead and put my piece through the machine. I haven't turned it inside out yet, but what we see here is the piece. I've trimmed off all the edges that are extra, and we're going to go ahead and turn this inside out. And once we've done that, we're going to do a decorative stitch around the edge, much like we did with the skirts and the bodice. It'll be about 1/4 inch from the edges, and once I get that done, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys. Alright, so I've taken my sleeves and put them through the machine. They are now attached to their backing. The bottoms are still open, so I'm going to be flipping them inside out soon. But before I do that, I went ahead and came over to the dress and cut the straps to the size they're going to need to be. I'll sew those up before I attach the sleeves. But first, what I need to do with the sleeves before I put all this sewing together is I need to cut them to the length they're going to be. I made mine a lot longer than they needed to be just because I wanted to be able to adjust them later. So I'll be cutting them right about here, all the way across, and then I will flip them inside out. Then I will do a decorative stitch all along the edges, much like we did up here on the bodice and down here at the bottom of the skirts. And so after that, I will be attaching them to the top of the dress in the position that you see them here. So just right along this line. So to go back over that again, we're going to be sewing down these seams. These sleeve seams are going to get sewn together. We're going to cut the sleeves, flip them inside out, do the decorative stitch on them, and then we're going to go ahead and sew them right along this line up here. Now when you position the sleeves up here, make sure that you do them both at the same time so you can keep track of where they are and make sure they're even on the dress. Alright, we are so close to being done with this dress, you should be excited. we are finished. We've got our sleeves attached. In fact, actually mine were so thick that I had to hand stitch them on. So if you end up having thick sleeves like me, go ahead and remember that one. And they drape all the way to the bottom. We've got our piece of wire up front here that I'm using as our attachment piece. White laces lacing up the back. And we are ready to go to the coast with her tomorrow. Don't forget to check out the shoot and the shop video for this project. Thank you so much for watching. Go ahead and let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and feel free to subscribe for more videos and tutorials to come.